Welcome back to Cosmic Comics. By now we've established that Warlock and Counter-Earth's fates are tied together. Before we can appropriately discuss the next issue of Warlock, we need to visit The Incredible Hulk Volume 1, issue number 158, published in 1972. Written by Roy Thomas and Steve Gerber, with art by Herb Trimpe. If you want to catch up on Counter-Earth, please follow the link to the playlist above. The first thing I have to point out is Roy Thomas recently stopped writing for Warlock, but we can see here that he's still writing and plotting the events on Counter-Earth, and as editor-in-chief of Marvel will continue to shape what takes place there. At the end of The Incredible Hulk, Volume 1, issue number 157, the leader, working from a remote location, had temporarily transferred his consciousness into Rhino. The leader used Rhino to lead Hulk away from the Earth using a small spacecraft traveling to the far side of the sun. En route, Hulk is smashing the small spacecraft. Hulk begins ripping the spacecraft apart, and we see from his internal dialogue that Rhino is currently in control of his own mind and can't quite remember how the leader is tied into all of this. The two start fighting as what remains of their small spaceship circles around the sun. The battle lasts for days. Two things about that are impressive. First, that Rhino could survive days of battling Hulk, and second, that nobody destroyed the platform they are traveling upon. And finally, where did they get oxygen from? As the brutes battle, the spaceship closes in on a world almost just like Earth, but on the far side of our sun and a microsecond out of sync with our own. Hulk and Rhino pass through Counter-Earth's atmosphere, and as they do so, an entire world opens up beneath them. Rhino calls for Hulk to stop, but Hulk fears it is nothing more than a trick. Rhino is tossed from the spacecraft and strikes Counter-Earth with a tremendous force. Warlock and his disciples hear the impact, but instead of looking into it, Warlock informs them that they have other matters to attend to. As for Hulk, he's enjoying his first moment of peace for days. And that's when his craft glances off a mountain peak and sends Hulk falling to Counter-Earth. We switch over to two sets of new men squaring off against each other. One set is led by the already established Cobra, and the other is a rebel band led by Porcunius. Cobra flees upon Hulk's arrival, while Porcunius befriends the Green Giant by offering him sanctum and shelter from human soldiers. Up above Counter-Earth, the day the High Evolutionary feared would come has arrived. The seal between the two Earths has been broken. The High Evolutionary is very unhappy about having both of the things he was attempting to avoid happen, the other being the peoples of Earth discovering the existence of the new men, both happening on the same day. Remember, the biggest difference between the two planets is there are no superheroes, mutants, etc. on Counter-Earth. Even the existence of new men would come as a shock to the citizens of Counter-Earth. We are introduced to Counter-Earth's General Ross and either Major or Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Talbot. They pull up on Hulk and numerous new men with tank and soldiers. This is the first contact moment that the High Evolutionary had feared, and now both of those moments have happened at the exact same time. The unshown ensuing scuffle results in the death of at least one Newman. Interesting, this panel shows the new man reverting back to its bestial form after death. This was notably not the case with Sir Ram in the previous story arc. Reporter Jason Anders arrives at the scene of the skirmish and starts asking questions, but is given an implied threat and told to scram. Afterwards, Betty Talbot and Bruce Banner pull up ready to work alongside General Talbot. Talbot is known for hating Bruce Banner, but here he appears happy to see the both of them. They announce that they have a crew working to restore the spacecraft Hulk and Rhino arrived on. The conversation is overheard by reporter Jason Anders, who takes the story to print within a few hours. The story mentions two passengers aboard the spacecraft. This leads to Cobra learning about the existence of a second otherworldly being. The next panel reveals that Cobra has recruited Rhino to assist the evil Newman. Sir Ram was the last of the High Evolutionary's Newmen. This means that the Newmen the Hulk is traveling with had to have been created by the Man-Beast and are therefore evil Newmen. These Evil Newmen are different from their brethren, seeking acceptance instead of domination. Hulk, also seeking acceptance, finds a common bond with the Newman rebels. Hulk wants help finding the spaceship that brought him here and help going home. The Newman rebels agree to help, afraid what the evil Newman might do with such a vehicle. This implies that Cobra might no longer be in contact with his master Man-Beast. Remember, Cobra arrived on Counter-Earth via spacecraft with Man-Beast. We switch back to Counter-Earth's Bruce and Betty. The spacecraft they have discovered is powered by gamma rays and guided by mental commands. This Bruce Banner stopped experimenting with gamma rays after he saved himself and Rick Jones from the blast of gamma rays at the Proving Grounds. The Bruce Banner of Earth was struck by these same gamma rays, leading him to become the Hulk. While hunkered down, afraid for his life, this was the moment Bruce realized how much he cared for Betty. Since that moment, their life has been great. Betty even became Bruce's lab assistant. A loud crash from a broken down wall has the Hulk coming face to face with Bruce Banner. This makes Hulk angry and leaves Bruce and Betty confused. Hulk blames Bruce for creating Hulk without realizing that this is a Counter-Earth version of Bruce Banner who had nothing to do with his transformation. Hulk is jealous that Betty always likes Banner but is always afraid of Hulk. As Hulk closes in, Banner tells Hulk to stay away from his wife. Again, Hulk has no concept of Counter-Earth as Hulk threatens to crush Bruce Banner for stealing his woman, and Hulk would have done it if not for a young Bobby Banner. Betty and Bruce's son runs up, crying, yelling at Hulk to leave his daddy alone, while uselessly pummeling away at Hulk. As he does so, Hulk proclaims that he doesn't smash children. The boy reminds Hulk of another young friend of his, Jim. Thus, Hulk turns away as Bruce yells for Bobby and Betty to hide. Once Hulk calms down, he's able to surmise that maybe this isn't the Bruce Banner that he hates. Maybe it's just this world. After all, this place is a little strange. Before he can finish completing his thought, Hulk is attacked by a rhino charge from behind. The evil Newmen enter the scene and the fight is on. Each group is fighting for control of the shuttlecraft. The Banner family waits and watches as the two sets of Newmen face off against each other. 100 million miles away, Leader has located his shuttlecraft, and in the process learns of Counter-Earth's existence. He then uses his mind force to call the ship back. At the same time, both parties' representatives face off. Hulk versus Rhino. Cobra versus Porcunius. Hulk's display of might distracts the two Newman adversaries. It's freaking super sweet how Hulk grabs Rhino by the horns and smashes him into the ground. Hulk hears the spaceship's engine start up, so he hauls Rhino back to the ship. In the battle below, Earth soldiers arrive, attacking both groups of Newmen. The evil Newmen and rebels both agree to set aside their conflict. One might think that they would have banded together to fight, but no. As soon as Talbot sends in his men, the Newmen return to their underground lairs. As if these creatures didn't have enough different names, Talbot refers to the fleeing creatures as Beastmen. As Hulk flies away, he looks back and sees the Banner family looking up in his direction. Hulk can't hate a man who raises a good son and can't hate a man who is what a father should be. Hulk can't hate Bruce Banner. As Hulk flies away, he thinks that he learned something about himself, but can't remember what. The spacecraft leaves Counter-Earth, returning back to regular Earth. Hulk relaxes and slowly turns back into Bruce Banner. I would wrap things up here, but I would be remiss not to include the last page of this issue, which begins showing Earth's Bruce Banner reflecting on how if he and Betty were together on Counter-Earth, then maybe he still has a chance with her on the real Earth. On regular Earth, at the Hulkbuster military base, we get to see Betty Ross and Colonel Glenn Talbot getting married. Instead of enjoying the wedding, General Ross can't help but hope for Betty's sake and the sake of her marriage that Bruce Banner is dead. It's nice to see the Hulk and the High Evolutionary's fates being tied together once more, and it would have been great to see their previous encounter acknowledged in this issue in some meaningful way. The Hulk wouldn't have remembered their previous meeting, but the High Evolutionary definitely would have. This story establishes the existence of a Newman underground rebellion, exposes Newman and superpowered beings to the Counter-Earth United States government, and begins breaking down the barriers between Earth and Counter-Earth. For the rest of this episode, I'm going to look at Mike Friedrich's 2-issue run on Warlock with art by Gil Kane in Warlock, Volume 1, Issues 3 and 4, published in 1972 through 1973. The splash page opens off the coast of Counter-Earth, Malibu, California, where Warlock rides standing on a boat in a storm. Jason attempts to warn Adam that if he doesn't get down, he might get scragged, which I assume means struck by lightning. Ellie insists that Adam is a mystery and always will be. Sounds to me like she's asking Jason to have faith. Jason voices his doubts, wondering if they always have to trust him. David insists that they must. Why else would they be out here with him just to watch a rocket blast off? Ellie tells Dave to lay off the sarcasm, while her brother Eddie says something that instantly strikes me as off. Eddie insists that their dad said that they might learn something. These kids hate their fathers. Dave informs us that Eddie and Ellie never completely broke off their relationship from their father the way that he and Jason did. Before we can learn more, Eddie turns their attention back to Warlock. We get some silly narration telling us how Warlock can't find the words to tell the kids about being hypnotized by the man-beast into destroying the world unless he killed those kids. Sure, Warlock wanted to kill them, but he didn't do it thanks to the good in the kids' souls. Warlock is going to tell his followers what happened, but before he can do so, Adam gets scragged. Warlock is filled with the High Evolutionary's voice, repeating his name, and then the soul jewel feels like cold fire as it twists and turns, tugging Adam toward the heavens. Without warning, Adam is pulled into the air. He's covered in these odd bubbles. The twins give us a good throwback, mentioning that this has happened before. While Warlock is up in the air, the Lord of Light / Shaper of Worlds lets Warlock know that his presence is required, but first, Adam wants to know why he was summoned so abruptly. This was a rather abrupt and violent way to summon Adam. The High Evolutionary is upset that Adam, whom he treated as a son, would dare to question him. This feels a little bit over the top, as previously the High Evolutionary has treated Warlock as a near equal. Warlock is put off by this treatment, admitting that although he reveres the High Evolutionary, he must make the most of their short time together. Warlock points out that within a few weeks of his rebirth, he was capable of defeating the Man-Beast. The High Evolutionary points out that even though the Man-Beast is gone, his influence remains. An influence we saw Warlock come under last issue when Warlock destroyed cities and killed world leaders on an alternate timeline. The High Evolutionary then complains about the barrier between Earth and Counter-Earth being broken when Hulk and Rhino landed on the planet. This meeting of the two Earths, no matter how brief, has convinced the High Evolutionary once more that Counter-Earth should be destroyed before it is discovered, thus creating a culture shock that could potentially destroy both worlds. Again, the High Evolutionary wants Warlock to release him from his vow to eradicate the evils of Counter-Earth, and again, Warlock says no. In this exchange, we learn that Adam's remaining objective is to eradicate the evils of Counter-Earth. Warlock resents the High Evolutionary's attempts to get him to renounce the vow. The High Evolutionary believes that Counter-Earth has tainted Warlock. As evidence of this, the High Evolutionary points to Warlock questioning the High Evolutionary's wisdom. How does one commit sin? By being in disagreement with God. Thus, questioning the High Evolutionary is enough to taint Warlock's state of divinity. The High Evolutionary then claims to have patience even if Warlock doesn't, which doesn't make sense, as the High Evolutionary is the one who, in his rush to destroy Counter-Earth, summoned Warlock to break their agreement early. The High Evolutionary agrees to keep his promise as Adam returns to Earth. Adam is deposited back onto the prow of the boat, exhausted and left unconscious from having spent his inner strength arguing with the High Evolutionary. At that same moment, a shark-shaped submarine emerges from ocean caverns. Inside the sub is a grumbling crew who are reminded of how Apollo, the apparent captain of this vessel, saved them after the fall of the Man-Beast. Apollo speaks of Man-Beast in the past tense, meaning he's still dead. It was Apollo who saw that the Man-Beast plan had a flaw. Counter-Earth need not be destroyed when it could be ruled. To be fair, the Man-Beast wants to destroy all life. We can tell that Apollo has a rather high opinion of himself, as he believes he's about to receive Counter-Earth's divine adoration. One of his crew, Raynar, has got a fix on Warlock's location. Apollo commands the crew to commence intercept operation. A large whirlpool is created in front of Warlock and the teens' boat. The teens attempt to use the boat's engines to escape its pool, but it's no use. Fortunately, Warlock is beginning to wake up. He looks up and sees that their faces are full of fear, and he asks them, "Where does your trust go when a crisis dawns?" David remarks that he thinks Adam is currently too weak to save them. Warlock, knowing that there might be some truth in this, says that the most he can do is try as he begins to rise to his feet. As he does so, he feels his disciples' faith renewed, and the soul gem crackles with stellar energy. Warlock leaps into the ocean and into the battle once more. This scene is very similar to the scene in the Bible where Jesus calms the storm. Jesus is sleeping on the prow of the boat, just as Warlock was, when a large storm comes up. The disciples wake Jesus up, and after calming the storm, Jesus asks them, "Why are you still afraid? Do you not have faith?" Warlock approaches the sub, and he is fired upon by Apollo. Instead of torpedoes, the sub attacks with lasers, but Warlock's dexterity allows him to miss the first shot. Apollo lets the reader know that this was all part of his ruse. He wanted to scare Warlock a little before going forward with the real attack, a large set of Dr. Octopus-looking tentacles which are exiting from the bottom of the sub. While philosophically musing during the battle, Warlock lets his guard down enough to get grappled by the tentacles. They wrap around Warlock's neck and begin getting tighter and tighter. He starts to get worried. Warlock knows he must survive. He looks inward and digs deep to call upon the power he needs to be free. He bursts free and then grabs the tentacles, noticing that they are easily ripped from their sockets. Apollo is amazed by the strength of his opponent and admits he was unprepared and needs a new plan. Apollo disperses a black and burning cloud from his vessel, blinding Warlock, and thus Apollo makes his escape. Afterwards, Apollo admits his defeat in front of his crew, but vows to nip Warlock's heroics in the bud, and thus secure the worship of Counter-Earth. Warlock, with no foe to be seen, returns to the surface. Ellie tells him that they thought he drowned, and if anybody was wondering how Adam survived down there for so long, we learn that he can take really deep breaths of air. His lungs draw deeply. Adam leaps from the water back to the prow of the ship, exclaiming that their foe is gone and that they are late for a previous appointment. The launching of the rocket, which Jason finally lets on, is for putting a weather satellite in orbit, and that Adam really wants to get there. Warlock and the teens were invited to the launch by Eddie and Ellie's father, Colonel Roberts. Warlock is hoping their visit will help heal the generational gap. The teens and Warlock close in on the Air Force base. We don't get to see where they park the boat, but the group finishes their journey to the base on foot. The sentry informs them that nobody is allowed in without a pass, especially costumed freaks. As the group stands at the gate, Colonel Roberts, Eddie and Ellie's father, drives up with David's father, Senator Carter, also in the vehicle. The colonel tells the guard to allow Warlock and company to pass through on his orders. Then the kids brag about how Warlock got everybody to come, and they all agree to meet at the launch site. As they arrive at the launch site, there is a man with a small crowd gathered about him. This is presidential candidate Rex Carter. An old guard politician speaks up, complaining about Rex Carter's lack of political connections and grassroots support. Rex turns to speak to Adam, telling him not to be swayed and to make up his own mind. Warlock insists that his mind is always open to anyone's views. In a bit of foreshadowing, Rex asks Warlock to make up his mind soon and tells Warlock that he feels their destinies are intertwined. Warlock is skeptical, as he has little dealings with politicians. Dave taps Warlock on the shoulder, pointing out that the rocket is launching. As the rocket shoots into the air, Apollo's shark submarine emerges from the depths. The sub shoots its lasers and the rocket explodes. The people at the Air Force Base, including Warlock, stare up, stunned and horrified. As the Soul Gem charges up, Warlock levitates away. Destroying the rocket is the first part of Apollo's plan. His initial attack has left the people of Earth afraid of him. But Apollo knows if he wants to be worshipped, then he'll need to defeat Counter-Earth's champion. Apollo calls for his men to quickly ready the ejection tube. He then exits the sub, claiming that once Warlock is defeated, he will leave behind his mammal-souled origins and join the pantheon of the gods. As Apollo moves in and strikes Warlock, the narration is laced with religious imagery. Warlock comes back at Apollo with a single blow, destroying a section of California coastline while Apollo's confidence begins to crumble. Apollo is hurt, and as he rises, Warlock strikes him again. Apollo, a man grasping for divinity, reveals his true form, a monster in the shape of humanity. Warlock calls out what he sees, a Newman evolved by the man-beast. The Newman claims that by dropping his human disguise, that he can once more regain touch with his innate animal power. The ability for Newmen to appear more human is something that we haven't seen since their very first appearance. Warlock tells the Newman that he has failed to overcome his bestial beginnings and says that he'll show no mercy until the Newman joins his master. The Newman, sensing defeat, tries a different tactic. He jumps down towards the crowd in an attempt to find an easier target. As Apollo lands, he makes it clear he's after the teens. Colonel Roberts tells them to make a run for it while he tries to protect them. Warlock rushes in from behind, shouting that Apollo's fight is with him. Warlock also asks if Apollo still calls himself by that name, and Apollo says that he does. This is a really weird panel that will come up again later. Apollo insists that he is attacking Warlock, but doing so at his weakest point, the lives of his followers, and Apollo is willing to kill or maim anybody who gets in his way. Colonel Roberts is smacked aside, and Apollo charges through the crowd. Warlock is watching the scene unfold as he levitates in from above. Apollo breaks through the crowd and grabs the unconscious bodies of Ellie and Ellen Roberts. Apollo gives Warlock a choice. Either he sacrifices these two followers or Warlock. The issue ends with Apollo asking Warlock to choose. The next issue begins with an extended recap of the previous issue's events. It does give us a better vantage point for seeing Apollo burst through the crowd before catching back up to the moment we finished on in the previous issue. Either Warlock surrenders to Apollo, or Apollo kills the teens. Apollo tells us that this will be the first act under his given name, Triax the Terrible. This name is terrible. I wouldn't mind, but it was just at the end of last issue that Warlock asked if Apollo was still calling himself Apollo, and Apollo said yes. To make matters worse, instead of Triax the Terrible, the cover of Warlock issue number 4 tells us to make way for the demon called Triax. We are given some great flavor text on what life on Counter-Earth is currently like. Bombing is called peacemaking. Every public figure fears for his life, and the Olympics fall under guns. No, not our sacred Olympic Games. Our hero Warlock has vowed to end this deluge of violence. Warlock scoffs at Triax's desire to use a given name and belittles him for being ashamed of his animal origins, a mud-wallowing warthog. Triax insists that he is Triax and not a warthog. Colonel Roberts attempts to rush forward and save his kids, but Jason and David hold him back, insisting that they have trust in Warlock. Oddly, Rex Carpenter comes to Warlock's defense, believing only Warlock has the power to save his children. Although the Colonel agrees with Rex's assessment, he doesn't trust Warlock with the lives of his kids. Triax knows he's in a tight spot and wants Warlock to back down. Warlock sees through Triax to the fear underneath. Instead of bargaining with Triax, Warlock attempts to intimidate him by threatening to tap into the power of his soul jewel. Warlock then taps into the gem, still threatening Warthog's destruction. Warlock is seemingly waiting to see how his opponent will react when he is distracted by somebody approaching through the crowd. We then jump backwards in time 3 minutes to the crowd of onlookers. A familiar-looking lady is pushing her way through the crowd towards an upset colonel. He wants to know how she got on base, as it's off-limits to ordinary civilians. David explains that this is Estrella, and she is one of Warlock's followers. Are we sure about that? The only other time we saw Estrella, she was asking Warlock to help her brother, the Prophet, who was actually the man-beast, and then she offered to let the teens stay at her place while Warlock was gone with her brother. Estrella rushes in, claiming to be able to help, but the Colonel is skeptical. Estrella, without missing a beat, claims to know who can stop Triax, the virtually disguised presidential candidate Rex Carpenter. That's an odd use of words. This quick misdirection stops any questions about how Estrella made it onto the base in the first place. Rex steps forward, claiming that he knows that he has amazing charisma on the campaign trail, but he's interrupted by the Colonel, who suspects this entire thing of being a political stunt. But Estrella interrupts the Colonel, now insisting that, hey, this is just the facts. Rex has to go out there. Rex is vocally hesitant, but agrees to go. Again, the Colonel suspects that Rex Carpenter is playing politics with his kids' lives. Once we see inside of Rex's mind, we learn that he sees this move as a gamble for his campaign, but also knows that Estrella has put him on the spot in a very public way, and it's too late to back out of the spotlight. As Rex steps forward to stand beside Warlock, the Warthog turns, his fight-or-flight response finally landing on flight. Warlock can feel his foe backing down and knows that this is the moment they must gain an advantage. As Triax turns to flee, the Warlock has the ground around him burst into a circle of flames. At the same time, Rex Carpenter calls for Triax to stop and listen to him. As Rex Carpenter speaks, something amazing happens. The Warthog begins to let its guard down. Warlock is amazed that Carpenter doesn't bluster or beg, and yet just by talking to Triax makes the beast terrified. Based on what he's hearing, the only explanation Warlock has is that Triax has lost his mind. For a moment, Triax clears the fog of Carpenter's words from his mind, and as he does so, he takes to the skies, still carrying Warlock's 2 young friends. After landing on some kind of launch tower, Triax knows the source of his power is in having hostages that Warlock cares about. Look, Warlock, and suffer. I can do whatever I want, and if you try to stop me, I'll kill one or both of them. Okay, but how long is that plan going to work out? I love the transition between these 2 panels. It starts with Rex berating himself for his failure, but Warlock, in typical comic book form, reminds Rex that as long as the 2 youngsters live, there is still hope. And then he screams out, "Wait, what is Triax doing now?" A look of panic upon Warlock's face. Up above, Triax is calling in orders for his Apollo craft to attack their current location. Despite the distance, Warlock hears the ship respond that weapons are locked. Triax's hope is a sustained attack from the Apollo craft will be enough to finally defeat Warlock. Back on Earth, Warlock levitates into the sky once more. As he does so, he remarks that he doesn't need a flying suit, and we're told that the skies are an easy joy for the Soul Jewel. And for the first time, we are told a downside to the jewel, as it brings awesome responsibility as well. Inside the gem is a flickering ember, which must always be nurtured and protected from the drenching rain, even if it cost Warlock his life. In the midst of Warlock's greatest trial, he is hit with a heavily viscous white liquid coming from a machine that is, frankly, well, it's long, hard, and filled with semen. It's a submarine. I just have to wonder if Gil Kane was told no, that shot can't come from the center hole of the front of the ship. This was just a bad choice. Warlock finds himself trapped as the liquid hardens into a solid gel. Warlock says out loud that he's not getting air to his nostrils and that within seconds he'll suffocate. But if he's stuck inside of a gel where he can't move or breathe, shouldn't those be thought bubbles? Anyway, as our hero faces possible death, the Apollo craft starts bombing the humans, and it is told not to stop until they worship Triax the Terrible. The colonel, watching his base and men being struck with an aerial assault while a Newman holds his children hostage on top of a tower, calls out that this is the time to strike back. David again tells him no, trust in Warlock no matter what. David is rushing in to stop the colonel, who tells David that his golden guru had his chance, but all he turned up was glitter. The salty colonel calls for every available plane to be in the sky. At the same time, Warlock is frozen in place. He hardens his resolve into a single thought: this must not be. A very stereotypical way for a hero to escape a very stereotypical situation. It works. Once free, Warlock flies back in, hoping to get some vengeance. As he closes in on the Apollo craft, it shoots 2 heat-seeking missiles in Warlock's direction. He has 10 seconds to avoid a deadly payload. While dodging the missiles, Warlock has time to muse on the similarities between Counter-Earth and what he calls True Earth's weaponry. As Warlock continues to flee the missiles, they catch up on him, forcing him to do some aerial tricks in order to avoid them. Warlock pulls off a similar move 3 more times. This completes a square and leads the missiles back to where they started, colliding with the Apollo craft. Warlock cuts the explosion so close that he's caught in a shockwave off of the blast. Warlock uses the Soul Gem to power his way out of danger, noting that the gem's power is not inexhaustible, and that his muscles are beginning to tire. This makes me think of all sorts of weird questions, like, how does the gem recharge? The complexity of the situation is compounded by the arrival of fighter jets. David complains to the colonel that he's making things worse, but the colonel insists that his profession is fighting, and that he's not just going to stand around helpless. Jason steps forward, pointing out that for the colonel, war machines are of greater value than Warlock's unique touch. David is afraid the colonel, by acting aggressively, is going to put Eddie, Ellie, and everyone here's lives in danger. At this moment, atop the rise, Triax has finally put the kids down and turned his attention towards the newly arrived fighter jets. As the jets come in to unleash their payload, they radio back to the colonel that his kids have regained consciousness, and the colonel lets them know that that's all the more reason to drop the bombs. The idea of wanting to drop bombs on the roof and save his kids doesn't seem to make much sense. The bombs, though, turn out to be tear gas, but still. Over the next couple of panels, the pilots tell us that their tear gas hit its intended target. They report that Triax is hurting, and we can see what I think are tears streaming down his face. I wish that this had been colored a little bit better. Back on the ground, the Colonel continues to remain in contact with his air support. Rex gives the Colonel credit for scaring Triax, while David points out that it was Warlock who stopped the attack and that the Colonel's actions have only made things worse. Triax is angry. He assumed one with his powers and might would be worshipped on this planet. Since he hasn't found anybody willing to worship himself, he decides to put forth the first sacrifice in order to make them believers. I do wonder how Triax became more powerful than most other Newmen. Triax holds Eddie up over his head. Eddie is tossed to the ground. As Eddie hurtles towards death, he calls out for Warlock, Warlock, Warlock. And Warlock, hearing his name called out in a moment of need, rushes in for the rescue. As Warlock closes in the distance, he's proud of Eddie's faith when staring death in the face. Warlock is afraid of breaking the trust between them, and then it happens. The trope of grabbing somebody at the last second is broken as Warlock fails to reach Eddie in time. Colonel Roberts watches his son fall and die right in front of him. He breaks into tears, blaming himself for what just took place. With his son dead, the Colonel decides he should have listened to the kids, and he now trusts Warlock to save his daughter. I have to admit, I was kind of expecting the opposite reaction. I thought the military guy would blame it on Warlock while reinforcing his feeling of self-righteousness. Hearing the Colonel's blessing, Warlock rushes into the top of the tower, attempting to reach Triax before he can reach Ellie. This time, Warlock is successful, landing a massive blow upon Triax. He follows this blow with a second, telling Triax that divinity isn't built on being a sham or murderer, and you have to love this line. You are but a creature of the mud, grasping to be what you are not. I am Warlock, and thus the violence you engendered shall be returned to you fourfold. This strikes me as odd because Warlock came here to end violence. This line of the comic also reminds me of lines from Leviticus 26 where they make reference to punishing one for their sins 7 times over. Triax attempts to fly away and fight another day, but as he flees, Warlock grabs Triax by his costume and accidentally rips off a portion of Triax's flight suit. This leads to Triax falling from the tower and meeting the same end as young Eddie. As Warlock looks down upon his now deceased foe, he reflects that although Triax was an all-around jerk and criminal, he didn't want to see this happen, but his manner of death does carry some poetic justice with it. As Warlock leaps forth to save Ellie, he comments that there is much about himself that he still needs to unfold. Upon landing, Warlock comforts Ellie as she mourns her brother's death. I love the continued animosity between the Colonel and Rex Carpenter. As Colonel Roberts is picking up Eddie's corpse, Rex makes the comment that at least that beast was disposed of. The Colonel tells him to shut up. Following these words is silence. The issue ends with a Counter-Earth teaser. The Counter-Earth version of Victor Von Doom has become aware of a disaster which threatens the entire planet, one from which only he can save them. Wind strike the Deathbirds. This finishes Mike Friedrich's 2-issue run on Warlock that mostly dealt with Triax, who was little more than a poor man's man-beast. I think it's interesting that he played with the idea of there being Newmen who might want to step into the power vacuum left open after Man-Beast was defeated. I also really enjoy bringing back a family element for Warlock's disciples. After all, most of these kids have prominent parents. From here through issue number 7 of Warlock, both Roy Thomas and Mike Friedrich appear to be guiding the story towards its conclusion, even though they don't write every issue. Next is a 3-issue arc that looks at Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom of Counter-Earth. Thanks for watching Cosmic Comics. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. I'm out.